Welcome to Dear Texas Radio, where we encourage Texans to drop everything and read. Your hostess for today's show is Roxanne Berkey.
Evening. I am part of Dear Texas Radio, where we encourage folks to drop everything and read. And I'm so excited tonight to be able to have a conversation with a writer and a pilot that I think you're going to find some great inspiration from. I'm happy to welcome Emilio Corsetti III. Emilio, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, being a professional pilot and an author really gives you a real strong basis for doing some of your writing. And I know one of your books is 35 Miles from Shore, which is really about the ditching of and rescue of the AML Flight 980, which was many years ago. And I think I want you to share with the listeners what was the inspiration for you to do that research and write that book, Emilio?
During the training, my initial training with Transworld Airlines, TWA, part of the training involved emergency training, where we would don life vests, we would jump into a pool, inflate the life vests, we would jump into life rafts and jump down escape chutes. And part of that training involved a discussion about the first and only open water ditching of a commercial jet. And so once I heard about the story, I did a little bit of research and found that nobody had written a book about it. So
really,
I decided to. The first step in that process was to look up the captain. And with the tools available to authors today, with the internet, I was able to locate him actually fairly quickly. And the thing that I learned right off the bat with that story was that was the captain's last flight. He never flew again. And
really,
part of that had to do with the fact that he was stripped of his airline transport certificate, and he just never had the impetus to go back through to regain his flying. So
I think that makes sense, right? I mean, if that had happened to you, I'm sure you could see his perspective.
Well, yeah, the FO, however, did continue on flying. He did continue his career, even though he also, I believe he may have had his ATP stripped as well. But he regained it, and he continued on with his career. But the captain did not. So there's a personal story, not just the dramatic story of a ditching and rescue. That's what attracted me to that story.
And even after locating the principals from that particular flight, how much research did you end up having to do on that, Emilio?
That book there was a 5-year project, and I'd say 3 years of that was research and writing, and then another 1.5 years of that was rewriting and editing. So that was a very lengthy project. Now the second book that I have, Scapegoat, was also very intensive research involved, but I discovered a writing tool that helped me immensely in organizing all of the research in what could have easily been a 5-year project turned into a 3-year project. And that writing tool is Scrivener.
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 Okay, actually.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. S what?
SCRIV, I think, let me see, I got it right here on my computer. SCRIVENER. It's a writing tool that allows you to enter thoughts and research and notes and then easily organize and find that information. It's indispensable to anybody who's doing any type of writing, especially nonfiction that involves a lot of research.
And that is some great insight for some of our listeners that may be planning to write or are currently writing a book. So thank you very much for that. Now, Scapegoat is your most recent release, and it's a very involved story. I mean, lots of people were were impacted by that. You want to share a little bit of the background, please?
Yeah, this particular story here, do you remember the film Flight with Denzel Washington?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, those of us in the aviation community disliked that film immensely. And the reason we did, and I'm a very big fan of Robert Zemeckis. I mean, I follow that. Whatever film he's in, he directs, I'm there. But he made a major mistake with that film in that he didn't bring on somebody who with knowledge of the airline industry. And as a result, the film is just full of inaccuracies and errors. And so after watching that film, I did a little bit of research, and I came across a forum on TWA, and somebody said, well, they should have told the story of TWA 841. And the reason that they brought that up is because in the movie Flight, you may remember that the whole incident started with the airplane rolling over and diving towards the ground, and they pulled it out at the last minute. Well, in TWA 841, that actually happened. So
really,
I did a little bit of research in that, and anybody old enough who was flying in 1979 knows this story because it was so big in the news at the time. And I obviously was just beginning my career at that time, and I remember this story, and I immediately assumed that the crew had been fired, because ultimately the NTSB blamed the crew for causing a rollover of a commercial jet in cruise, and then covering up what they did by erasing the CVR. That's what the NTSB claimed the crew did. And so I had just assumed that those guys were out selling real estate.
Right.
But in my research, I discovered that not only weren't they terminated, but the airline stood behind the crew. And in fact, they even filed a petition for reconsideration with the NTSB after the findings, the report came out. And they were promoted on schedule. So
really?
Right there, I knew that there was something there to that story, that you have the NTSB and Boeing claiming crew misconduct, and then you have ALPA and TWA supporting the crew. So you had a conflict there, unlike in any other investigation that I'm aware of.
Well, and the erasing of a CVR tape, I mean, that's not a very easy thing to do. And as I understand it,
actually, it is an easy thing to do.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. See, I explained this in the book, but the CVR was introduced into commercial aviation in the mid to late 60s.
Okay.
And most professional pilots were against it. I mean, to them, it was an intrusion into the workplace. And, who wants to have their conversations recorded with the potential of that recording being used against them? That was the thought at the time when they first started appearing in the aircraft. So to appease the pilots of this worry, this concern that they had, they put an erase button right next to the voice recorder test button. So all you had to do to erase the CVR was reach up and press the button and hold it for 3 seconds, and the CVR was completely erased. So,
wow.
Yes. So you have that fact there. But when the crew was questioned after the incident, none of them could remember erasing the CVR. None of them, even the captain, whose routine was to erase the CVR. He testified that was his routine. He made statements after the fact that he always would erase the CVR. But in this particular incident, it was an emergency landing that they made in Detroit. They had reports of fuel leaks. They had reports of sparks from the tower. There was a concern of fire. They had to get the passengers off the aircraft. There was concern of the condition of the landing gear. So the last thing on their minds was whether or not they needed to erase the CVR. And the other thing related to the CVR is that the CVR was never tested for its functionality. In other words, was there something else that could have caused the CVR to be blank? And it wasn't completely blank. The CVR records 30 minutes. 21 minutes of the 30-minute tape were blank. There were 9 minutes of audio. So right off the bat, the crew came under suspicion. And from that moment on, the investigators, at least Boeing and the NTSB, suspected that the crew had intentionally erased the CVR because they had done something in cruise that caused the aircraft to roll over and go out of control. And they didn't want investigators to know about it, so they erased the CVR.
Wow, that's a thought that most people that aren't in that industry would never even consider. I mean, we just all kind of think it's supposed to be there. So I can't imagine having saved a flight from destruction that they would have, the time to even erase the tape. I mean, that just would be.
Well, as I said, there's two things going against the crew. One is the fact that erasing the tape takes only 3 seconds, and you can completely erase the tape. That's the first thing. And the second thing is this was a highly unusual incident. I mean, rollover incidents don't happen very often. So it's so rare that Boeing and the NTSB felt that it was impossible for there to be a problem with the plane and that the crew had to have done something. And there's another thing. There was another part of this incident that led the investigators astray, and it had to do with the fact that a passenger and coach had written a statement that she had seen the flight engineer exit the cockpit, hand meal trays to the flight attendant. Then the flight engineer returned to the cockpit, and within a minute, the upset began. So in the investigators' minds, there was a connection between the flight engineer leaving the cockpit. So here's sort of how this theory developed. So the flight engineer comes out of the cockpit. While the flight engineer is out of the cockpit, the two pilots, the captain and the first officer, decide to do some unauthorized procedure, which involved pulling a circuit breaker. So now the flight engineer is out of the cockpit. He returns to the cockpit. He sees the pulled circuit breaker. He pushes it in without saying anything, and that begins the whole process of the rollover and dive. That was the theory that they put forth. That's the theory that they went with for nearly 2 years.
And we're going to hold it right there, Emilio, because we need to take a short break and hear from our sponsors. But I want to get a little bit more detail on this when we return.
Sure.
Other worlds, other dimensions, other universes, nothing is off limits, forgotten or what it seems in stories from Larry Morris, an award-winning science fiction author. With 8 books on different subjects with different characters, you never know what will happen. His latest book, Close to Home, chronicles 2 races on 2 planets over 250 years of history. Jump right in and read Larry's books, and they can be found at any bookstore or at books.txauthors.com. We'll be right back with more of the show in just a moment.
Dear Texas would like to thank our sponsors. McKinney, Texas has a rich history, one it embraces and loves to share with visitors. Nowhere is this more evident than McKinney's historic downtown with more than 100 eclectic shops and eateries to explore. Situated just 30 miles north of Dallas, McKinney offers the perfect getaway from the urban hustle. For more about McKinney, check out www.visitmckinney.com or call 888-649-8888. 8499. The third annual short story contest begins March 1st and runs through July 31st. Enter your short story for a chance at prizes and getting published. To learn more about this annual event, please visit our website at txshorts.com. Dear Texas would like to invite you to the McKinney Square Book Festival on June 3rd, 2017. The event will be held at the Performing Arts Center from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Meet 40-plus Texas authors, many of whom have won awards. Special events will take place during the day, and a special musical guest, Billy Dawson, will perform at 2 p.m. For more information, please visit our website, mckinney.deartexas.info. Wimberley Valley Tourism welcomes people to explore the many fine shops, restaurants, and wineries that make Wimberley special. More at wvtla.com. From concept to casting, recording to post-production, Spoke Media is dedicated to creating a superlative listener experience. www.spokemedia.io. EBG 247, where you can find ebooks galore 24 hours, 7 days a week at ebg247.com. Welcome to Dear Texas Radio, where we encourage Texans to drop everything and read. Your hostess for today's show is Roxanne Berkey.
And this is Rox Berkey. I'm here with Dear Texas Radio, where we encourage folks to drop everything and read. And I'm continuing my conversation with Emilio Corsetti, author of two really thrilling books, as well as a writer for publications including Chicago Tribune, Multimedia Producer, and he actually does some articles for the Professional Pilot magazine. So, Emilio, thanks. And when we departed, you were telling me about some of the controversy that came around with the discussion of the flight involved in Scapegoat, where the Boeing 727 did a roll and started heading toward the ground from an altitude of 39,000 feet. How long did you actually do the research for this book? How long did it take you?
This is a 3-year project. A year and a half. The way I write is I write in a nonlinear fashion because simply because I'm writing nonfiction, and I may interview somebody in Chicago that was involved in the beginning of the story, and the next day I might fly to Phoenix and interview somebody in Phoenix who was involved at the end of the story. And it's only because of scheduling that I have to conduct my interviews based on when I'm available, when the person I'm interviewing is available. So what I do is I'll interview the person and I'll get their part of the story, and then I'll write it in narrative form, and I'll put it in Scrivener, the software I told you about before.
Right.
And then I'll go back and I'll continue that until I've completed all the interviews that I feel that I need to do. And I interviewed passengers, I interviewed investigators, I interviewed the crew, and like I said, it's nonlinear. Each interview is occurring only when that person is available to interview. So with Scrivener, I'm able to write in the notes, write in the research, and put it in narrative form. And then very easily, I just shift things around and I start putting it into a beginning, middle, and end. And so that was the 3-year project that I took. But there was one other thing that made this book possible that I would not have been able to write the book without. And that is when I contacted the captain of this flight and told him of my interest, he, without solicitation, sent me thousands of pages of documents. He sent me 4 cartons initially, and then an additional carton later after I went down and talked to him in Las Vegas. And I had literally, he had saved everything related to his case: newspaper articles, magazine articles, depositions, trial transcripts, NTSB hearing transcripts. Everything related to this case was handed to me. Literally several thousand pages of documents, maybe upwards close to 10,000 pages. So
wow.
when you take all of that information and then you piece and you have all of the first hand accounts from the people that you interview, you start to fill a fuller picture of what actually happened. And one of the key people, believe it or not, in this whole story, okay, first of all, this is a mystery. If your listeners who like mysteries, this is a whodunit. What happened to this airplane that caused this airplane to roll over and dive 39,000 feet, where the crew pulled it out just seconds before crashing? Was the crew involved? Did they do something, or was there something wrong with the plane? That's the central question in this story. And the answer to that story doesn't occur until almost the very end of the book. And the person who discovered it, who found the answer to what actually happened, mm-hmm. he didn't want to be interviewed. And I tried multiple times to interview this guy. And I found out later that the reason he didn't want to be interviewed was because he has a side business that he does that involves contract work with Boeing, and he did not want to alienate Boeing. So that's why he didn't participate. He didn't interview. He didn't agree to be interviewed. But he answered my questions via email and via phone. So technically he wasn't interviewed, but his whole story of how he pieced this together. Well, actually, he did piece it together, but it was based on another individual's work, and that is covered in the book. It's very interesting how, believe it or not, you had teams of investigators from TWA, ALPA, Boeing, the NTSB, right. and none of them got it right. And the one person who did get it right was a civilian retired aeronautical engineer who figured the whole thing out.
So after 3.5 years of interviews and all of this research, which I think all your interviews were probably helped because you're a pilot and you have at least some ability to go to other locations sometimes, what was the most surprising thing that you did discover? Because you say it's a mystery, but it's nonfiction. So this isn't just a mystery that you contrived.
Right. Well, okay. Here's one thing. For example, I'll just mention TW-800. A TW-800. There were a lot of people who believe that the NTSB got that wrong, and that there was a missile involved. All right.
Right.
And that the plane was shot down by a missile, and a lot of people will consider that a conspiracy. Like it's a conspiracy theory. All right. Mm-hmm. Well, in the book that I wrote, you can check all the reviews. You can go to Goodreads. You can go to Amazon. You can check the reviews. Mm-hmm. None of them are saying this is a conspiracy. This guy has just come up with this bizarre theory of what happened. And the reason is because I lay out the facts. I lay out what the NTSB said happened. I lay out why I believe they're wrong. And then I lay out the most likely series of events that led to this upset. And when you see it all laid out in front of you, you can make your own conclusion. You can draw your own conclusion as whose version is correct. But so far, nobody has challenged that theory that I put in the book. And the other thing is, it's not my theory. I'm not an aeronautical engineer. I'm not a whiz-bang crash investigator. I'm simply telling the story as it took place in real time, and I'm relaying what happened and how this new theory came about and what the new theory is.
Mm-hmm. And it's amazing what you have put together from all of that. So, because this is a nonfiction and a mystery, do you have some goals of what you'd like to see happen because you put all this information into this book?
Well, obviously, I would love for the crew to be vindicated. And I can say that I do have firsthand knowledge that the head of the NTSB, the chairman of the NTSB, the current chairman, has been given a copy of the book. Now, whether or not he read it or not, I don't know, but I do have knowledge of that. And I also know that there are 2 open petitions in front of the NTSB. So if the NTSB wanted to set the record straight, they have everything they need to do that. The chances of that happening are very slim, and the reason is simply because of time. It happened in 1979. It happened to a Boeing 727, which is no longer in service, and 3, there were no fatalities.
Well, thank goodness that there weren't any fatalities. I mean, it's just extremely exciting to have a real-life mystery down on paper that people can really learn about how these people were all spared, how these pilots obviously at the moment of truth pulled the right levers on the plane to make it not crash. So, I know that your stories are available on Dear Texas Authors. Where else can listeners go to learn more about you, your stories?
Yeah, obviously the information about the book, including all the interviews that I did were videotaped. In each videotape interview that I did, I would put up a short clip on my website. And my website is emiliocorsetti.com, EMILIOCORSETTI.com. So you can actually go all the way back. And one thing, too, I would encourage your listeners who story is there's a documentary on my website called The Plane That Fell from the Sky. And the actual people in this story are on that.
Excellent. I know that the listeners tonight will be getting on that website really soon. Emilio, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me. We really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me again.
Have a great night.
Okay, you too.
Dear Texas would like to thank our sponsors. Bourgeois Media and Consulting, a book publishing consultant where creative inspiration is realized. More at bourgeoismedia.com. Wimberley Valley Tourism welcomes people to explore the many fine shops, restaurants, and wineries that make Wimberley special. More at wvtla.com. I'm Alex Anthony, your announcer. For all inquiries regarding voiceover, narration, and announcing services as heard on this program, please make contact through voxluxstudio@gmail.com, voxluxstudio@gmail, or you can call 512-537-6077. Thank you for listening and for your support.